So welcome to Let's Rock, advocating for engineering controls against COVID in US schools. It's presented by Indoor Air Care Associates, which is us and you. Tara, moving on. All right. So here's our tagline: cleaner air, fewer disruptions, and it really hits on what we're hoping to achieve and what we hope to network with you and other parent groups to achieve. And that is that we stop the cycle of kids getting sick, coming out of school, and other disruptions due to subsequent waves of COVID. And also we have the benefit then of avoiding the health impacts. Next. So our agenda, we'll tell you a little bit about us. We'll talk about our vision and mission. We'll talk about why indoor air quality is important to focus on. And we'll talk about our action plan that we're using and what the next steps are so that you can connect with us and connect with other parents groups or work in your school district on your own as we're doing, and maybe with our help in terms of how we've done certain things and tackled questions. And then we'll go to questions with the group. Next, please. So who we are? We're a parent-founded, community-led with a mission to bring many communities together to advocate locally from the ground up for recommended air quality mitigations that are going to protect our children across the United States, ultimately. We work to connect people with local advocacy groups, and we provide a platform for information sharing among those groups to take unified action on national or state legislative issues together in concert when opportunities arise to advance indoor air quality. Next. So this is us. I'm Michael Bailey. I'm a reverse engineer and a manager in the FLARE team at Mandiant, and I'm from Madison, Alabama. And I'm the father of twin 3-year-olds and a 7-year-old, along with Tara Bailey. I work remotely, as I may have said, and Tara is the founder of a nonprofit called I Vote Madison, which is a group that is eliciting more engagement among citizens and more visibility into what's going on so that people take a front seat instead of a back seat or a passenger seat to what's going on. Tara has a background in marketing and graphic design. Next. All right, so here's the problem with trudging on. We've been venting for a long time. We need to start ventilating because it's been 2 years since people in the CDC and the American Society of Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning Engineers and the EPA have told us what we can do. And although some recommendations have changed, many have stayed the same, and we're focused on those. Those are measuring, ventilating, HEPA filters, and focusing on the number of air changes. There are other opportunities, but these are the most core things that once we've gotten rid of being overwhelmed and we've really taken a look at things, these are kind of really the rudimentary meat and bones of what we ought to all be doing. We've realized nobody's coming to the rescue. Nobody's walking into our town to say, hey, you need to spend the money on this. But the CARES Act funds have been available. The ARP Act, the ESSER funds, all have been available. And schools have, in some cases, in many cases, returned kids to the classroom without these protections. But we know better. We know what we can do. And we want our kids back in schools or not to be continually reinfected. We want to apply these things that we know have worked. We've seen the studies. They've actually continued to be recommended because they do continue to work. So we have to step up and speak up ourselves. If we want our kids to be in schools and healthy and scoring high on tests, we need to use those funds that are on the table, find other funds, or work on finding some other way. Where there's a will, there is a way. Next.
Some of the recommended mitigations that we have seen, and when we say we've seen these through looking at the sources, the CDC, the EPA, the Center for Green Schools, World Health Network. Many of these things I'm sure you all are familiar with, but anyhow, these are the things that we're focused on. The monitoring indoor air quality. You don't know what you're dealing with until you monitor what the rooms are producing. We have increasing ventilation, installing portable HEPA air purifiers, achieving a minimum of 6 air changes per hour, and then MERV 13 filtration where possible. So monitoring of CO2. It's important to monitor CO2 because it gives us a measure and look into the rate of ventilation. Per Boston Public Schools, exhaled air is usually the largest source of carbon dioxide in classrooms. Carbon dioxide levels are used as a sign of adequate ventilation and air exchange rates. So you can see here that the CDC says one potential target benchmark for good ventilation is CO2 readings below 800 parts per million. And then if unable to get below 800 parts per million, increased reliance on enhanced air filtration, including portable HEPA air filters, is necessary. So monitoring indoor air quality, we have seen different approaches to this. Some, and one that we advocate for is a continual monitoring of indoor air quality versus sporadic monitoring, which means, taking a snapshot of a classroom versus having a device in the classroom measuring the CO2 levels and other levels of different things continually. And in Boston Public Schools, during it was an EPA webinar, you can't manage what you aren't monitoring or you don't monitor. We learned that Boston Public Schools have a dashboard that's super transparent that allows anybody to go in and actually see at the classroom level what the carbon dioxide is, the carbon monoxide, airborne particles. I mean, all these different measurements, they're really trying to make sure they're transparent and all this. And we think creating this level of transparency builds a lot of trust. So if you are interested, you can go just type in Boston Public Schools indoor air quality, and you can pull their information right up, and it's really cool. So increasing ventilation. CO2 concentration can be an indicator of ventilation effectiveness. So it's really important that we increase ventilation. Research has demonstrated that classroom under ventilation in the US is far too common. Researchers hypothesized several reasons for low ventilation rates, including the lack of verification when systems are installed, deferred maintenance, or attempts to save energy. Some of the benefits of ventilation is the reduced incidence of respiratory illness, including asthma, common cold, influenza, reduced stale air and odors, and prevention of headaches and drowsiness. And then it contributes to better air quality, which is linked to improved cognitive function and higher academic achievement. A lot of the information that we're sharing here is from the Center for Green Schools, and they're kind of amazing. They have a whole lot of resources out there, and what their focus is on indoor air quality is to focus on the facilities people at the school level, so that they can advocate for these indoor air quality measures. They can advocate that to the superintendent and the Board of Education. And what I have found is that parent groups can really benefit from a lot of the literature they're putting out and the resources they have. So a little bit about that. Mike, do you want to talk about HEPA filtration? Okay. You're muted. Oh, you're still muted. Can we unmute Mike? There we go.
I was just messaging Kate to help out with it. Thank you. I also want to point out that the EPA has said that 7 to 10% of the students in a given classroom may have asthma. And so it's a not insignificant number of students who would be helped by these measures, irrespective of coronavirus. HEPA filtration, I want to share some important facts here because some groups have sometimes missed the point, and that missing the mark can help us lose faith in the protections that otherwise have been proven to help. And so I'm going to share that what we're talking about with HEPA filtration is not something that you put into your HVAC. It's a portable unit. HEPA, I mean, in our case, what we're advocating for. The HEPA specification is special. It means that 99.97% of particles that are 0.3 microns still can't get through the filter. It's special because that very size is the inflection point of efficiency in filters. It's the bottom. It's called the most penetrative particle size. That means it's the worst case. So if you get something that says it can get particles that are smaller than 0.3 microns, there's a chance that you're getting something that doesn't conform with HEPA specification and doesn't perform as well. And I'll talk about a pitfall that New York City schools fell into with that exact problem. There's also the clean air delivery rate, which coincides with how many square feet you can really cover with a HEPA filter to get the kind of protection you're hoping to get. You can check with something called the AHAM verified program. I put quotes around it because I want to emphasize their spelling is a little different than the real word verified. But you have to check that you're actually getting the number of cubic feet per minute you hope to be getting to get the air changes we're targeting to actually have the money that we ask people to spend make a difference so that they can believe in these protections because they've done it right. The other factor is ozone, which is hazardous. The California Air Resources Board has a registry that you can check. We have URLs for all these things later if you have questions, but There are some devices that are electronic that purport to do ionization or purport to do plasma or charged air or super air and things like that. And there are other air cleaners that also maybe use UV lamps. And in those cases, it's necessary to make sure that they're at least registered with that board as not emitting harmful levels of ozone, because without certain controls like ozone recovery, some things like that can actually release things into the air, including ozone. And ozone is very bad for lungs. It's a very known pathogen that causes long-term health issues. So we can't be having ozone in our air. Also, there are decibel specifications you want to watch out for. And on the right-hand side, you see there's a fact sheet from the Center for Green Schools that Tara highlighted and pointed out. That group has so many resources, and their fact sheet about in-room air cleaners is very specific about all these things. I also will note that UV is not necessarily preferred and is not something we target. It's more expensive. It has a marginal effect because of the duration of exposure that a virion needs in UV light to be able to actually become inactivated. And when it's blowing through a filter, it's not going to get that exposure, so that UV doesn't really provide a significant benefit. And it also poses questions about whether there, is any need for, whether this spectrum of UV light is creating ozone. It's just an additional question. So it's not preferred per se, but it can be turned off on some units. The asterisks on here call out factors that may entail multiple portable filters for your room. First of all, if the filter that covers your square footage for your room has 60 decibels as its highest fan setting rating for sound, you're going to have a teacher that has to yell over that, and they're going to turn it down. They're not going to get that clean air delivery rate that you were targeting. Additionally, if the clean air delivery rate for a given unit doesn't actually meet the amount of square feet, or the number of square feet, I should say, then again, it's another reason why you would need multiple units. So I think that covers everything on there. I will say that decibels are not directly additive, fortunately. So there's a calculation that you can use to figure out what's going to work for teachers and what's really not. So clean air delivery rate and air changes and the AHAM verified program kind of tie in together. The number of cubic feet per minute that the filter can put through has a direct relationship with the number of air changes per hour. And that has a direct relationship with the amount of risk that you're reducing. And the studies have shown that the top of the envelope for a lot of the studies has been 6 air changes per hour. And as far as the chair of the ASHRAE epidemic task force is concerned, it's become the necessary target, 6 air changes per hour. And what an air change per hour is the number of times that your filter can move the same volume as your whole room contains within 1 hour. And so we're targeting changing the air in the room 6 times per hour based on experts from ASHRAE, experts at the Center for Green Schools, and the studies that we've seen that have shown the positive effects. If you want people to spend money on these protections, we have to stress that if you underdo it, you'll be underwhelmed with the result. And the protections we're looking for are coming from very specific specifications. And we want to make sure that's communicated, conveyed, and executed. Otherwise, we'll find that people will, again, lose faith in the protections and not adopt them widely. Also, AHAM verified program is how we verify the square footage associated with a unit. And in that specification, they assume 8-foot ceilings. There's an equation you can use to figure out for 9-foot ceilings what you need to do. And they also assume that you want 4.8 air changes per hour. And that's because they've had this long-standing standard for a long time. So if you want to get more air changes, which we do, then we have to do our own calculations. So there's more for you and me and us to talk about to try to achieve that air change rate. But in combination with ventilation and filtration, by the two together, we're seeking a cumulative amount of air change of 6 air changes per hour or more. Next slide, please. So here's the pitfall I was talking about with HEPA. When advertisers and manufacturers market things that are better than HEPA, they often say, hey, this can catch things that a HEPA filter can't because it's smaller than the HEPA spec. It's 0.1 microns or something like that. And the problem with that is that the HEPA spec really is special. It came from the Manhattan Project. The Department of Energy wanted to capture particles that were radioactive and that were very small. And they found that the very bottom of efficiency is at 0.3 microns. And that filters become more efficient through other means as you move to smaller particles, and more efficient through other means as you move to bigger particles, but the particles that slip through are 0.3 microns. So when you're buying an air purifier for purposes of mitigating coronavirus exposure, it needs to be a HEPA filter, and that means that it needs to get 99.97% of 0.3 micron particles. Anything else is something to be aware of. New York City schools, in the Gothamist, you can find an article that says New York City schools bought air purifiers that they said were better than HEPA. And so the city agreed to regard them as HEPA filters, which they're not. And they found that the offices where they bought HEPA filters had better risk reduction than the schools where they bought not exactly HEPA filters. It's off-brand HEPA unless it says it's 99.97% of 0.3 microns. And we don't buy off-brand for protecting our students. Next. What I'll say is kind of what I said to our school. I'll preface it and say this is a bit of a side quest for us. You know, we came in hoping to advocate for well-proven technologies. We found out about this ionization. We did some research because it didn't appear in any of the literature that we've been looking at from CDC or from the EPA or from ASHRAE. That means it's not recommended by anybody except for the people who are selling it. As far as we can discern, the studies that are done on ionization are commissioned by the groups that are trying to sell it. And they don't represent the kind of peer-reviewed work in as-used conditions with controls that we see for other things like HEPA filters or that we see for ventilation. So a couple of examples of data points we have found, though, are that Boeing said, no, it doesn't show significant disinfective effectiveness. The Lancet COVID-19 Commission said it's got unproven efficacies and it potentially may be polluting the air with harmful secondary pollutants. And I'll second that and say, from a layperson's perspective, my view is that our problem is to subtract something bad from the air. But what ionization does is add something to the air. And it's something that's understudied because they know that ozone is a problem. They have attempted to get certified for things like UL 867 or UL 2998. And those certifications do sound like they would conform with not emitting ozone. But as it turns out, Marwa Zatari, who is in the ASHRAE Epidemic Task Force, has written that the ions in ozone that are coming out of these units are often higher than reported, despite the fact that they are listed by underwriters laboratories as conforming with, say, UL 867. They emit more ozone than they are supposed to. And really, we should be adding no ozone to the air. Ozone is a harmful pollutant for lungs, and we're trying to protect lungs. So we need to subtract and not add to the air. The CDC, ASHRAE, EPA, they uniformly have said there's an absence of an established body of peer-reviewed research showing real efficacy under as-used conditions. We have this URL at the bottom if you want to inform yourself about that. Many schools are adopting it because it's so much cheaper. And over the 10-year lifespan of these units, they're advertising that there's no filters, no maintenance. It's just plug it in. You spent your money one time, no sustainment costs. And that's very attractive to schools. But it's not actually going to increase focus. It's not actually going to solve the problem. It's not actually going to help students who have asthma, as far as we can discern, because these studies are telling us it doesn't appear to really have measurable efficacy. Next, please. So this last one is actually an ASHRAE recommendation that we found out from talking to an ASHRAE local chapter member. Is pretty extensive. And so it's an opportunity to increase our protections. New Mexico actually implemented a law that says you have to do this or you have to do a HEPA filter. So I'll talk about what the difference is between a MERV 13 filter and a HEPA filter, and at least in our conception. And I'll talk about where it may be able to be applied. So minimum efficiency reporting values are ASHRAE standards for the efficiency of a particle size range of 0.3 to 2 microns, 1 to 2 microns, and 3 to 10 microns. And so these are just ratings for how effective filters are. Schools usually use something like MERV 8. Commercial MERV levels might be around 11 or higher, and MERV 13 and greater is what ASHRAE is trying to recommend for schools and other locations to minimize COVID. Unfortunately, it may be expensive based on what we've heard. So standards testing by ASHRAE has shown that MERV 7 and MERV 8, which are commonly used, they get 42% efficiency in filtering bioaerosols like coronavirus. MERV 13 gets 85.9% efficiency. So that's why it's an opportunity. It's different from HEPA filters because what we're talking about here is what you put into your HVAC system in the school. It's not a portable unit that goes into the end classroom. So it's not our primary thing that we're working on because we actually found that locally there's a business having a lot of success with ventilation. Local business called Adtran, and they're achieving almost outdoor levels of fresh air using ventilation, and they found that to be less costly. And so we're pursuing the same strategy. Next slide, please. Okay, so Tara, do you want to speak to the educational resources?
Sure. So as I mentioned before, we have been looking at a lot of different resources to gather the information that we're sharing with you today. This is not coming from us. It is coming from the experts. So the Center for Green Schools we had mentioned. There's the National Council on School Facilities, who recently put out a report. It's like the state of our schools, which is very interesting. I think as we all have seen, our schools are not really receiving or haven't received a whole lot of money for facility upgrades and things like this. So this is why this is a huge opportunity right now, because we do have funding coming into the school system. Some other resources, of course, to the EPA, ASHRAE, CDC, a lot of these different groups as well are having amazing webinars that are allowing us to hear from experts on these subjects. And I would encourage you all, if you haven't already, to go to some of their websites and register for some of those. We are going to try to, whenever we find a webinar that's really great, we're going to put it out on our Facebook page and try to share it with everybody. I think the more we can share these resources with each other, the better off we're going to be. So how do you find out what COVID relief money is available? Here in Alabama, we have something called A+ Education, and they recently released a tracker of sorts so that you can go in and see what your school district has in terms of ESSER funding. And so that's been a pretty cool resource. Just realized we can go in there, we can go in and see like what facility upgrades, how much money they're putting towards that, what they're using that to upgrade. And I don't know if this exists in every state, but if it doesn't exist, I think you can just reach out to your school, directly and ask them for their ESSER funding report, and they should be able to give that to you and let you know where the money is going. A lot of schools have pressure to close the learning gap right now. And so we're finding that a lot of the money is being spent on technology and, virtual school type options, or just any, mental health is a big thing.
Has been spent on that. And those things are short-term problems that were ameliorated, but we have still probably got funds on the table in some states and cities to solve these longer term problems, to address the real issue that's causing the pain.
Yes, they absolutely, there is funding out there. And honestly, if the schools don't have the funding, every city in our country is receiving ARPA funding. So, for instance, here in Madison, Alabama, our schools are our pride and joy. Like, we are known for having really great schools. And so the city in Madison is receiving $5.4 million. So really, if the school doesn't seem to have enough of the ESSER funding to make it go as far as we need it to in order to implement some of these mitigation strategies, then the city should have money. The county actually has money. And here in Alabama, they're about to go into special session in maybe August or so to discuss how to spend $1 billion of the ARPA funding. So there's ways to get money for this. And, if the schools say, well, we really need to use their ESSER funds on things that they've been neglecting for a while, like I've seen some schools actually don't have windows that close. So they had to buy new windows. Some have leaky roofs, so they're having to do that. So we would encourage you to go find out what's out there and understand there's a lot of money in our country right now for upgrades like this, and we should be pushing towards that. So the framework for activism, I know a lot of you on this call have already been doing tons of work in your local communities on this topic, but I think it's a good way to encourage others. If you haven't done some of these things, maybe think of something that we have listed here that you haven't been doing that maybe we could focus on or help out with and work with each other on. Of course, social media. We're seeing a lot of groups that have popped up. Like, we have our COVID school safety group for our local area. Safer at Home Schooling Support Group is one here that I established with some friends when everybody was going to be doing virtual school. How can we pod together? How can we be safe? So a lot of those groups still have a lot of parents in them that care about this topic. And I think we need to be pushing out this message of indoor air quality. We've seen a lot of debate involving masking, and although we all have our feelings about that, I think that most parents, no matter what side of the aisle you lean on, when it comes to that issue, we can agree that clean indoor air is a positive step that we can all get behind. That's the hope. And so we need to bring parents together. We need to figure out the funding and make sure we are pushing towards, knowing where the funding is, knowing who your representatives are, so you can go have a conversation with them. Bring together the groups, engage local companies. So one thought we had is a lot of companies are out there and they are vested in making sure their employees stay at work instead of having to take off work to take care of sick children. And so if for some reason we can't get this achieved through ESSER funding, I think that there are companies out there that would like to jump on board with some of this work, who maybe have some, even the company that we reached out to, Adtran, had a really amazing effective ventilation system where they were bringing in the clean air. And maybe there are experts in companies out there that would lend their expertise to this effort. So another thing is we need to make sure we're involving the PTO and PTAs. Those are the parent groups. Those are the people that have a lot of say in what goes on. They're able to influence the Board of Education and the superintendent. And we need people in order to be able to influence and identifying the power structures, understanding where your schools are getting their orders from, so to speak. Like, so for our schools, although they're not getting orders per se from the Alabama Department of Health, they are taking a lot of the recommendations and they actively listen to the Department of Health. So, just today I had a call with Alabama Department of Health. And so I think that they're, understanding that indoor air quality, maybe we can shift the message a little, maybe we can make sure that schools know what options are out there so that when all this ESSER funds come, they're not kind of overwhelmed by all the marketing and all of that and spending money maybe in a way that could be better spent. So here's a really cool opportunity that you may or may not be aware of. The Office for Civil Rights is proposing amendments to the department's regulations in implementing Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. As part of the process, they're seeking written suggestions from the public on how best to improve the current regulations. And so, the Americans with Disabilities Act and is there to protect kids that have disabilities. And so some of our children have things like our daughter was born premature and she was born with respiratory distress and she has some kidney issues. And so when we're talking about putting children into the school system, I believe that this indoor air quality push and HEPA filtration and all of that actually is something that's needed for the kids. We shouldn't be making the situation where kids have to just learn from home if they are more susceptible to COVID. Every child deserves to be in the classroom, and we need to make sure that's a safe place for them.
Yeah, that's been a flaw with the select your own risk level. If me selecting my own risk level involves withdrawing my participation from society, that's flawed. Really, if people want to take more risks, that might be that might be on them, but I don't, and my kids don't. I also want to point out that we heard about this through Stacy from Pan-Ended, who I believe joined this call. Pan-Ended is another group that's concerned with these issues, in particular for those who may be disabled. So I want to thank Stacy for sharing this. We dug in and learned a little bit about their deadline. It's not a deadline, it's a soft deadline for longer comments. And we wanted to bring that kind of soft deadline to everyone's attention.
Yes. So I would encourage everybody on the call, if you know of advocacy groups in your area for people with disabilities, please make sure they're aware of this. I don't, some of these things kind of hide and fly under the radar until we make them known and get a hold of them and let other people know about this. So we wanted to touch on real quick, overcoming objections, because even though we believe everybody should, be on board with indoor air quality, we realize that in the political climate we find ourselves in, we may be faced with some people that aren't as on board with that. So some of the things that we've heard are, kids are going to catch COVID anyways. You can't protect them. People said that about polio until the human cost was too high. So, you know, we have to try. It's good for kids to catch viruses because it builds up immunity and they need that. COVID creates underlying conditions. It weakens the immune system. And in 2021-22 school year, 1,127 children died from COVID. The more likely outcome, though, is long COVID, which can be disabling for some kids. Schools can't afford this. Where will the money come from? There are funds on the table now. That same solution won't work for every school. This is why we need to use CO2 monitoring to evaluate and adapt our solutions. The key thing here, I think, is the monitoring part of this. If we're not monitoring it, we don't even know if the solutions we're putting into place are working.
There's a difference between monitoring and measuring. To say that you measure something would be to say that you walk into the room maybe with a tape measure, or in this case with a handheld CO2 measurement device, and then you walk out of the room. Monitoring is something that persists after you walk out of the room and alerts you when the solution you put into place is no longer solving the problem. So
yeah, some of the other things are, you know, what about the halls or lunch? You know, we need to include that. We need to be thinking of all those things. These are great reasons why ventilation gives superior coverage over filtration, but we do the best we can. Recommendations change. These are the ones that have stayed the same. So when we say, yeah, recommendations change, we have to be back this up with the research that we have about HEPA filtration and about peer-reviewed studies involving HEPA filtration and ventilation. People who catch it twice must have a comorbidity. Lots of people are having infections and lots of sick people in this country. So, you know, we can't just put it off on, they must be sick already, and that's why they're cutting it again. So call to action, my favorite part, because, you know, we have probably been in more meetings than we care to, and what we need to be doing, making sure we take action from the meetings that we're in to make a difference. So educate yourself and others. Like we said, the Center for Green Schools is an amazing resource. Also, the EPA has a indoor air quality guide that you might be interested in. They have a Tools for Schools program that is involving indoor air quality, and that's a pretty long guide that you can read so that you're up on all the language when it comes to indoor air quality as you're advocating for this in your school systems. Connect with us. So at the tinyurl.com/IACA-connect, we have a form that you can fill out. We want to stay connected with everybody on this call so that we can share our resources together and improve upon each other's and, you know, cheer each other on when we have these successes. And also you can join covidmeetups.com. And then there's a Facebook group that we found, you know, oftentimes we're feeling a bit alone in this. And I think it's important to know that we're not alone. And so there's a Still COVIDing Parents Edition Facebook group that has, I think, about, 7,000 people or more in it. But it's a good place for people to feel not so alone in this. And then read Managing Air Quality During the Pandemic, questions with your school, find out what air quality setup your schools have, share information with your school. This was supposed to be a questions graphic that went away, but that is for questions. And then make sure you connect with us. If you don't already follow us on Facebook, then please do so, Indoor Air Care Advocates. And then, you know, we're developing, we're just kind of kicking things off, but we feel like putting this presentation on now, even if it's not totally perfect, is actually better than waiting till everything's polished. It's because we're trying to act quickly into this next school year coming up. So with that, I'd love to open the floor up for questions.
Everyone now has the ability to unmute themselves. And I'll let folks start their video. Thanks. Looks like Karen Strine has a question first.
Hi. Hi. Yeah, I'm Karen, and I'm thrilled about this because let me just tell you, my son and daughter-in-law followed. He's, by the way, he's a administration at a commercial HVAC company. There's 3 big ones in the United States. So but I'm not getting anywhere. But long story short, they got COVID from an asymptomatic case from one of their school kids. So my heart was broken. So I'm thrilled that you're doing this. But here's my question. We made Corsi Rosenthal boxes, okay? Why can't they be put in schools? They cost under $80 to make.
I agree. The one thing I don't know, and I need to speak with people who know better, but the one thing I don't know is what do you do with a Corsi Rosenthal box to figure out that you've hit your filter time and replace it, and how do we fleet maintain them? Yes?
Okay, I was told 6 months, that they're good for 6 months. And then there's Joey Fox that I follow on Twitter, and he's an engineer in Canada, I believe.
I do too.
And
Yep.
you know him? Okay, so didn't he say that he did a test on them, that they're not a fire hazard? Listen to this. My son and daughter-in-law, thank goodness, got out of the school district they were in. The superintendent's secretary hung up on me when they had nothing on the agenda in January about COVID. On their board meeting, they had nothing. And I said, you have nothing about COVID mitigation. And she hung up on me.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Say that,
I'm the grandparent.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I want to say
the Corsi, the Corsi roast, I'm sorry, my last thing I promised. But anyway, I made these. No one would accept it. I finally gave it to the teacher for her own home. But these have been proven, if 4 people in the house are positive and you put that in a child's bedroom and then everybody mask in the common area, everyone else doesn't get sick. You know, these things have been proven to work. I mean, 3M's, so of course they make the filters, but 3M is speaking out. So these are legitimate. They've done the studies.
I've seen anecdotal information to say, do the studies. I'd like to see, and you may share it with me. Like, I think that now right. So what I have seen about HEPA filters, I have not seen a parallel set of studies for CR boxes, not to discredit them at all.
No, they're there. They have them. So I'll try to find them for you.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, to the extent that I've found peer-reviewed, controls-tested studies in great number, I've gravitated toward those solutions. I also think that with HEPA filters, you can do fleet management depending on the vendor you get. Broadband cards and be able to indicate when certain filter elements or fans are going. And I think that provides a superior facilities management capability than a handmade thing, not to discredit or discount. And it may be that we take a multi-tiered set of approaches and we say, fine, if we can't get this, then we'll get that. Here's the studies on that. But I personally lack the information. I haven't managed to educate myself and find the studies that coincide with what I've seen for HEPA filtration, telling me what % of transmission reduction has occurred at what, with what brands of fans. I think that the CR boxes vary so widely in their materials and making that it may be difficult to encounter a study like that. But if you have them, I would love for you to email them to me.
Thank you. And thank you for your work. I'm finished, but thank you. God bless you. This is angelic. This is angel wing things. Thank you. No, I'm serious. I can't say.
We hope you'll continue to work. I think that
I will.
Doesn't mean stop. And we've got
I've gone from fundraising, which I did for 10 years, and I'm very persuasive, to this, and I was a nurse, so I'm very, very concerned. But I have to have the materials, so thank you, because I'm not the expert. So I'll count on you for all these materials. Wrote them all down. Thank you.
Awesome. All
right.
Any other questions? I mean,
we're just finished. No, thank you. Okay, thank you.
You're good. You're great.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Cool.
Do y'all have any kind of infographic, a flyer, something that we can start sharing now with parents and all these different social media groups?
Tara, we need the press kit.
Yeah, so we're actually working on that. The Center for Green Schools just did an amazing study or survey, I guess, of 4,000 schools across the country to see how they're utilizing the ESSER funding. And there are some really good questions on there that I think we can pick from. So if you would be interested, we are wanting to get a group of people together that want to actively work on these little pieces that we can bring in so that we can have this very solid, like, here are the questions that you should ask when you're starting. We just started asking questions to our district, and then as they answered, we realized we have different questions we needed to ask as follow-ups, and it kind of went as a nice back and forth. to that. So, but yeah, if you would like to to jump in and help us with that, we would love that. But the Center for Green Schools has an amazing study that they did that I would encourage everybody to go and look and see what schools responded and how they responded.
Do you know if there are any statistics, any kind of data on the effectiveness of these measures as far as like, did they follow schools and see if there was a reduction in COVID cases, that kind of thing?
I believe we've had some studies that I've been finding about the reduction in COVID cases when HEPA filtration and ventilation are implemented. And I think those are critical to have when we're advocating for this. So what do you think, Mike?
I think that the specific question was whether the Center for Green Schools followed up to determine the differential impact, and I don't know about that. I think the studies that Tara is referring to, I think would be the studies like, for instance, the Hume Foundation in the March region of Italy, and their study on the effect of ventilation on COVID, decreasing it by 82.5% at 6 air changes. And she may be thinking of the several studies about HEPA filters doing similar performance rates. It was, one of them was in a classroom. It was a 1 in 6. I should say it was a factor of 6 decrease, which again is 82% at 6 air changes. This is again why 6 air changes in particular is key. If we just put a HEPA filter in a room, not knowing what it is achieving, we will not know what we will achieve. But we do have studies that tell us that regardless of whether it's ventilation or HEPA filtration, there's a pretty consistent result if you get 6 air changes per hour. I don't know what happens at higher air changes, so that's why I think we should at least be targeting 6 air changes, and we should start with ventilation if we can get it. If we can't get it, then we should move on to filtration. And it is worth looking into whether Corsi-Rosenthal boxes can be made to conform with some kind of like a uniform expectation, if we have to fall back on that crowdfunded, crowdsource it, and everything like that. But really, part of the reason why we want devices is because we know that it's likely to be more effective if the school administers and implements it and can follow up with it. So that's what our goal is, but we think that we should all be like water. We should find the path that actually gets us somewhere. So if that doesn't work, there's got to be a fallback. And so we have to be determined to find, what is that? Where do I go? How do I do it? I see a file upload, but it's a local path on someone's computer. So it's the name of a path to a file. No problem.
I see where Alice has asked a question about advocating both for masks and for ventilation, because with Omicron, there's a lot of studies out there that are showing that people that are unmasked in crowds, even if it's open air, are catching COVID. And that is absolutely something that everybody needs to kind of make a decision for themselves. I personally am a fan of masks. I want my daughter to mask when she does start going into the classroom with other kids. But in terms of pushing this specific advocacy, I feel like if we can get the people that are not so much for masks to also be on board with clean indoor air, we might have better luck getting it done. More success. So I definitely, still advocate for the masks, absolutely, because they are shown to decrease, COVID transmission and viral transmission of really any viruses.
Yeah, in one instance, there was a case where HEPA filters performed at about 80%. And then if you did HEPA filters and masks, this is the CDC study, universal masks in that classroom, it halved the remaining risk. It went from 80% to 90%. So it ain't perfect, but I definitely would rather my child have a 1 in 10 chance of getting a disease that she has a 1 in 17 chance of being potentially permanently affected by. Decreasing those odds of badness is worthwhile.
I saw someone else had mentioned in the comments too about the germicidal UV. I've been looking a lot at the FAR UVC lamps that you can install in classrooms. That those are safe and don't do. What are y'all's opinion on that? I guess
I want to pursue that, but I believe that I must first pursue what I consider to be the basics, and I think that's focusing on air quality. I believe it's a far cry to think that I'm going to persuade schools to do something that seems exotic. But filtration doesn't seem very exotic. UV has been used for a long time. It's not really exotic, but it's something that people are maybe not as familiar with, or maybe afraid of, or just see it as different. I've read the studies and literature as well on what the injuries are when you goof up with UV. And I understand it's like, you know, you got a sunburn. But I also am sensitive to the fact that I'm not sure that every facility staff considers themselves to be ready to handle something where you have to be, you know, making sure it's pointed a certain way and all that. So I think when it comes to subtracting stuff from the air, that works, and it works really well, and I want it. I want everything, but I think I have to focus on the things that people feel that they can handle right now. And I think that ventilation and filtration are those things for now. We can then probably begin to work on things that will further protect people. I believe that as we raise the bar, we're going to encounter a pandemic or a variation that's going to raise its attack. And I think that just getting air quality into place with filtration and ventilation is my goal personally. I also think that every group should decide for themselves what they think will work, what they think they need to ask for. That's why we're talking about networking all the different groups. We're not talking about telling anybody what to advocate in their school, but we're telling you what we're advocating. We're telling you why we're advocating it. And I hope that that makes sense to maybe at least create a uniform set of things that we all can ask for. Because when parents across the country are asking for the same thing, it's a lot easier to perceive that that's the need. So that's what I'm hoping to get behind. Thanks for asking. Good question.
Anybody else have any questions?
I'll ask one more if that's okay.
Yeah.
Do you guys have product recommendations for like the HEPA filters? I mean, because it's everywhere. It's all across the board. And
Yep.
as far as like an affordable, you know, a good unit that we can recommend, do you guys have anything?
I've been doing research. I've been doing cataloging and inventorying of which vendors purport to conform with the actual HEPA specification, which vendors are listed in the AHAM verified registry, what their clean air delivery rate is, what the number of dollars per square foot would be to use that to clean the air, and so on. And I can share that spreadsheet. If you contact us, can you message Indoor Air Care Advocates through Facebook, or can you, you know, put it in your comment in if you go to the Google form? And we're hoping also that everybody might go to that Google form. I'm going to reshare the link here. I'd love for you to share what state you're in, what city, and what school districts you're concerned about, and see if we can connect you with somebody else who's doing that, because it's easier with two parents. I mean, if you have to be solo, you can do that, but we need probably to reach out to other parents and get more voices into it. But reach out to me there and I'll share that with you.
I also added our email addresses to the chat. If anybody wants to email us, either one of us directly, that, you know, please feel free to do so. And I will add to that that we have a parent here in Alabama who decided, after getting some pushback from the Board of Education and superintendent, to get the HEPA units installed in the classroom. She went ahead and started a GoFundMe and raised over $10,000 and got 70 Medify, I believe it was, the Medify unit. Medify Air into the classrooms. So, you know, we think that's amazing, and we feel like that's kind of a last resort in a way, because we don't want to have to expend more work and energy to get something done that we think that the schools and the ESSER funds and all of that should be going to handle. But that's an option, you know. And I think a lot of parents, as I'm reading articles, a lot of parents are going that route. They're sending, you know, HEPA units with their teachers to, you know, as many classrooms as they can. And in that, it's great, but a full approach, you know, to the whole school versus the, you know, one classroom, I think is going to work better to protect kids. And also advocating on a statewide level and working with a lot of different groups can also help with equity. We end up having, you know, we're in an area that is fairly, you know, has a decent amount of money, but the people in areas that don't have as much money can't just send a, you know, HEPA unit with their kid to class. And
that
so
was my other comment was going to be, how do we make this accessible for everybody, for all the kids?
We're working on getting it to be done not by parents, because when individual parents do it, we're exercising our privilege, which I understand you have to put your mask on before you fit the mask on the airplane seat next to you, right? I understand we have to take care of ourselves. And sometimes that may be the way that it's going to be. We also sometimes we have to exemplify what we hope to see in the world, right? So that I definitely don't shame anybody for doing what they need to do for their kids, but I also think that the way that we get that equity issue addressed is by first seeking that it not be on parents, seeking that it be on the schools, and that we support the schools in doing that with the funding that's out there, or by making new funding, or whatever the case may be.
Yes, Karen?
Well, okay, so I think the grassroots approach is really good with the schools. But I'm thinking, hang on, now I lost okay. Then I'm thinking, you have the like my son's in industry, like industrial, not commercial, but and he's a chemical engineer, and I can't get his ear on this, but you get because he's too busy. Okay, and that's sad. But anyway, you get the smaller mid-range HVAC companies and the people that work for them, that they maybe could teach some of their employees to specialize in this. And then they help go to the school board meetings because they have the knowledge of the field to ask questions about connections, fire hazards, all that. I think we really have to use them too. And I think the mask thing, my gosh, I'm totally pro mask. It's become so politicized. You can't even bring it into the equation, or you're going to get people that are just going to walk away. I think your focus is right on who doesn't want clean air for their kids in school. It becomes a rallying, uniting point, and it should be equitable. And that's the heart tugger. And that you always have to, I've raised money. You have to have the heart tugger. And our kids should be that alone on their own. Cognitively, this is scary stuff with long COVID. I got a threat from another nurse because I'm writing an article about long COVID, and she said, don't be a fear monger. That's unbelievable to me. Unbelievable. So guess what? That's the first line of my article. Okay.
That's great.
No names, but I'm thinking this is wrong because it's if you don't bring up long COVID, you're doing a public health disservice. And if you don't bring up the long-term effects of the kids' brains and test, you are doing this is a public health disservice that's happening right now. And they know it. They don't know how to handle it because they don't want to create panic. There's already enough things happening. And I know that, but that everybody shouldn't be penalized. So you rising up is what we have. And I'll help. I'll do whatever you need me to do. I'm not good with the graphic stuff. I'm the advocator. I'm the voice. I'm persuasive. I'm in people's face. In a nice way, I'm a middle child. I'm a middle child. But you are you two are very well spoken and knowledgeable. Now you need the team. And I'll be a team member.
We posted the Google form in the chat. Did you see that? So
I saw it. I'm gonna access it. Okay.
Yeah, that's a good place to put your information in terms of where you live, what school districts you may be concerned about, if applicable, and then kinds of things you might be available to help do. Because we certainly find that there is a lot more work than
two people can handle. Absolutely, absolutely. This shouldn't fall totally on your shoulders. You need volunteers. You need the movement. That's a good one, by the way. The word movement.
Yeah.
Okay, let's use that. Okay. You got to, the buzzword. That's kind of a cool word.
Fair point. I want to give Alice a moment to give
yes, absolutely.
I had Kate Marsh who wanted to speak briefly about WHN. Kate, do you want to come in at the end?
Sure.
Okay. Alice, can we have your question?
Sure, thank you. Well, first, I just wanted to thank you for this incredibly important presentation for everybody's safety. And also to second what Karen said about the importance of messaging around long COVID, because many people mistakenly think that their kids and them aren't at risk because they're healthy. And that's definitely not true. Even for fully vaccinated and boosted people, there's been some reporting in Salon and the New York Times about long COVID and fully vaccinated people. So I just wanted to briefly talk about places, the liberal and progressive places where it may be useful to both advocate for required masks as well as ventilation. I live in Berkeley, California, and we actually have a requirement in our schools, which is wonderful, for masking now. And we don't even have extremely high positivity or case rate. And this is going to be so important for everybody's health. Now, I don't know about ventilation. I'll need to follow up with that because they're both important. So I'm wondering, both for the more progressive and liberal areas, is there a way that we could do both? And for the areas which aren't, aren't as progressive, perhaps, both, can join together with parents across the political spectrum for ventilation and then do separate advocacy for masks, just because a 10% rate of COVID, especially with long COVID, is too high. And, and they can bring it, some of their family members may be at high risk of severe illness from COVID. So the idea that the schools wouldn't be safe and accessible for all kids and safe for their families is horrible. So I really hope we can all work together as best we can for the mask and vaccination when it is politically possible. Thanks for listening.
Absolutely. That's why I think it's important for parents in each area to decide what things they're going to advocate for. If it's not the full complement, that's fine. But if it's more than just the air quality that we're working at, then that's whatever makes sense in the place where you are, politically, societally, et cetera. And for us, it's just the most neutral, bare bones things, the air quality. So agree, Alice. Thank you. Kate, can I let you speak about WHN, the World Health Network? This is not to be used with the WHO.
I wonder. Okay.
Hi, yes, so I'm from the World Health Network. I'm going to put a link in the chat. So I met Michael and Tara. They're part of it as well. And we have virtual space and resources to help groups from around the world in the United States in various aspects. We've helped parents groups, we've helped teen groups, college groups. We bring together scientists like Yanir Baryam and Eric Feigelding, Stephen Bellido, who's aerosol expert. So we have a lot of opportunities for you to be a part of the community. We have daily meetings every day. So I know folks in general who are concerned about COVID, especially as days move on, people move on, you might feel isolated. Like, am I the only one who still cares about getting sick? And what about monkeypox? So we're also following monkeypox. We're very on top of that data, and we're putting out like truthful, like unbiased, like purely scientific facts about that. So we're happy to have you join our group. If you fill out this contact form, one of our member representatives will reach out to you for an introductory call and to see if you'd like more information. You could also just look at our information that we have posted publicly on our Twitter accounts, on our website, so you can just stay informed at WHN, the WHN on Twitter. That's the Twitter handle. And the website is there as well. So this was a great seminar, Michael and Tara. I'm really glad you put this together. Great information. And we look forward to future collaborations. Thanks.
Thank you. And thanks for your help.
Yeah, thank you so much, Katie. I think we will want to do maybe some of these calls like on maybe a monthly basis, and it would be lovely to have the World Health Network join us, and then maybe have some specialists and scientists and people that can really speak to this in a bigger way as well. Join us.
I should mention that as well. Yanir has been very available to folks in the community. So if any of you are trying to get a meeting with your local representatives, or your different, I don't go to those school meetings. I don't have kids yet, so I don't know the names of the groups, but I'm just saying that Yanir is very open to coming and being sort of like the on-call expert. So if you need sort of like a heavy hitter in the room, like he can really handle it. So you're not alone, and we are happy to share all types of resources with you.
True. We saw his testimony to OSHA for the healthcare workers rulemaking, and that was clutch.
Yeah. We'll stick together and we'll get through it. And I think groups like this are going to really make a difference in individual communities and getting the air better in schools. So thank you.
I think it's great to stop venting and start ventilating. I'm really
I love that.
I gotta start doing something. So hopefully everybody here, just in closing, will hopefully share their information so we can get in touch. maybe try to connect you with the groups that we know about or the other people in the cities that we know about that are nearby, to try to create a broader network of parents who are asking for the same thing. One of the things we're going to be doing after that is looking for you and everybody here to do the same thing, go branch out to the local groups and find parents, unite with parents and advocate for these things so that we no longer have to kind of sit in the corner and withdraw from society. I mean, the reality is that, yes, it's here to stay. Yes, we need to learn to live with it, but that means, as Stacy from Pan Ended said, that means we do have to learn. So let's rock.
Yes, yes. And just for reference, we are going to take all the emails of, when you registered, and we're going to email the presentation out to you along with any links or anything that we have that can be valuable to you, and the chat as well. So, all right. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for coming.
Bye.